Of course, my stuff wants to act up when I can't have one day of peace. One day of peace is all I ask. One day of peace. One day of peace. No, I can't have that. Damn it. Okay. Am I there? Yes, I am. Haha. Oh my gosh. Anyways. Hello. Hello. Thank you for joining today. Hello, everyone. My name is Viliana, your one and only villainess. Now, if you're wondering, those who are new here or anything else, I've had my little reading corner. I stopped for like about a month or two because, one, I just wasn't feeling up to it, and stuff happened during those times. So it's usually every Wednesday, but I'm glad I can finally get back into it because it's something I really enjoy doing. And if you're wondering about the book I'm reading, it's Spiral, which is the sequel to Ring. And if Ring sounds familiar, it is because it is the book that inspired the movie. The horror movie franchise. And I have my other, if anybody is wondering, I do have a little playlist of the first book and then this book as well. But yeah, it's been a while since I've read this, since I read it. I don't even know what see, I don't even remember what happened back last time. I think I remember, okay. So the character is Ando, and the main character is Ando. And there is a woman. I think her name is Mai. Yeah, her name is Mai, and she's missing. And if, as I said, a lot of it connects with the first book. Well, it's a transition from the first book because obviously everybody's connected, because once you see Miss Sadako's tape, you know, you get murked. You get offed 7 days later. So if you're actually wondering about the first book, as I said, I do have a playlist on my YouTube, so so yeah, Ando is the main character of this book. He is a coroner, or mortician in that general area. He deals with the dead bodies, and he was doing the autopsy about he's the main one that was doing like all the autopsies. Well, not all the autopsies, but like a good chunk of them. Trust me, the first book is wild. So I would recommend go reading the first book or going into the playlist of the first book, because it's wild when I tell you. I don't know a lot of the lore, but this book, honestly, it shocks you in some aspects. Because half the time, because it is still a horror novel. So, oh, 1 second, 1 second. Sorry about that. Calamity, I swear to God. Yeah, I'm just giving a little bit of an update on my little reading corner on where we left off. As I said, I don't even remember what happened. All I just know is the main character, Ando, some that's the woman in the book, is missing. She's not dead because they would have found her already. Miss Sadako don't play when it comes to killing people. And yeah, Ando, he is currently looking for Sadako again. I guess. It's just really fucking weird. So I don't know what's going on. Okay, hold on. Let's see. Go back to the next page. Oh, okay. And then there's there is some throwback to the first book, because that's where obviously that's where it all started. Hello, I haven't seen you in a minute. Oh, just talking about the book I'm going to be reading. Oh, you've been lurking, okay. Hi, Fob. Thank you for being here, best mod. Yeah, there's some throwback. Oh. Thank you for the follow. Thank you. So yeah, I haven't read this book in like over a month and a half, I believe. So I fucking kind of forget what's going on. So we have the main character, Ando. He's a mortician. And also he's also he lost his son. He just recently got a divorce. So he's still sad about his son. And then he got a body that's also kind of connected to the other bodies from the incidents of the first book. And then it's just a whole spiral from there. Anyways. So then he met this woman named Mai, who Mai was sort of not, their relationship was weird. She was dating some guy named Ryuji from the first book, but Ryuji got murked by Sadako herself because the guy from the first book couldn't figure out, well, he figured it out at the end, that you'd have to show somebody else the tape. So homeboy Ryuji got done murked. Kind of hated, no, not kind of, I did hate him for the kind of person he was. I don't care if he changed. But anyways. So, the guy from the first book is now in a coma because of the incidents near the end of the first book, which I'm not going to spoil it, which is wild, because once you go back to the first book, you're just like, what the shit happened? And then you're like, whoa. Can't believe that happened. And not gonna lie, I was surprised at the first book because I was blaming everybody in that book. When somebody tells you not to touch something, you don't touch it. And look what happened. People get murdered. So, remember kids, touch something somebody tells you not to, you might possibly die. Anyways, so, Ando, as I said, is a mortician, was dealing with Ryuji's body in the beginning of Spiral. And as I said, Ryuji was like with Mai, sort of, kind of. It's really weird, as I said. You'd have to read the book to figure out their relationship. But then Ando was kind of like having the hots for Mai. She sounded really pretty. By how he described her. But Mai is now missing. Nobody fucking knows what's going on. And then last time he went like a few like chapters ago, going back like when I'm reading back, he went to her apartment. And he probably had an interaction with Miss Sadako herself. But he did not watch the tape. But she's still a spirit. So, spirits can be assholes. now he's looking for Mai because homegirl just up and left her apartment. Oh yeah, and he kind of was sniffing her stuff. He's a panty sniffer. That's in the book, by the way. Also, they just disrespect dead people. Like in the first few chapters, they were just disrespecting Ryuji so much. They called him rotund. Or not rotund. They were, oh my god, they called him hold on, let me see if I can find it. That shit was so funny. Hold on. Yeah. Called him a robust body. Oh yeah, and also the guy Ando, the main character of this story, also knew Ryuji. But he knew him in passing, sort of. Because I know that he compared his body to an oil drum. Which was so funny. Yeah, here it is. He was built like an oil drum. Damn, just disrespecting dead people. Like dead ass. Like you just straight up disrespecting dead people. Also, 1 second again. Oh my god. Okay. So yeah, I don't know. I would come back with a vengeance and somebody said I was built like an oil drum. Not gonna lie. Okay. So yeah, so Mai's missing. Ando was looking for her. And Miss Sanako's tapes are out into the world. That whole shit when they were trying to find her was wild in itself. Alright, so let's go to our little reading corner. Hi, hello. Weavers. What the hell? I have not used this in so long. Oh my god. Okay. Alrighty, and I have some music. Alrighty, everyone. Hope you got your snacks. I hope you got your blankets. So sit back and relax as we continue our journey in Spiral. Also, this stuff comes in parts, so we're still in... Wait, hold on. Okay, we are in part 2, Vanishing, chapter 5. Alrighty. Now sit back and relax. And just prepare for the bullshittery known as Spiral or the Ring series, because honestly, this shit kind of gets me confused sometimes, especially after the first book. Honestly, hold on, let me. Hold on, I don't really like. Hold on. Let's see. Let's see. Okay, I think I found a better one. Alrighty. Yoshino kept reaching for his water glass. He'd pretend like he was going to pick it up and then look at his watch instead. He seemed to be worried about the time. Maybe he had another appointment right afterwards. Excuse me for a moment, will you? Yoshino bowed and stood up from the table, threading his way between the tables of the cafe terrace. He went over to a payphone next to the cash register. As Yoshino flipped open his notepad and started punching buttons on the phone, Ando was finally able to stop for breath. He leaned back in his chair. An hour ago, at exactly noon, Yoshino had shown up at his office at the university. Ando had taken him to a cafe in front of the station. Yoshino's business card still lay before him on the tabletop. Kenzo Yoshino, Daily News, Yokosuka Bureau. What Yoshino had told him, Ando couldn't believe it. It had left his head spinning. Yoshino had come in, sat down, and launched into a monologue that did nothing but seed Ando's mind with doubts. Now he'd gone off to call God knows whom. Oh, also, Yoshino is part of, as his card says, the Daily News. He is friends with the character from the first book. According to Yoshino, the whole thing had started on the night of August 29th at a place called Villa Log Cabin, a property of the South Hakone Pacific Land Resort, located where the Izu Peninsula met the mainland. A mixed-gender group of 4 young people who stayed a night in cabin B4 had found a videotape recorded physically by some woman. A videotape that killed anyone who watched it exactly a week later. What the hell? Hi, Jay. Oh, okay, water. Oh, shit. It sounded like nonsense no matter how many times Ando went over it in his head. It's probably something akin to psychic photography, Yoshini said, as if that explained it. And I would think they'd be crazy too if somebody said that shit to me. I should probably move myself a little bit. Ah, oh no. There we go. Mentally projecting an image onto a videotape? That was out and out impossible. And yet, suppose he told somebody about the numbers he'd found on the piece of paper that poked out of Ryuji's belly. Or the strange vibes he'd felt at Mai's apartment. Wouldn't people think he was talking nonsense? There was just no equating what you've experienced yourself with what you've heard from someone else. One could never feel as real as the other. But Yoshino had been directly involved, and what he said was substantiated by Ando's own experience. At least. He had helped Asakawa and Takayama investigate the case. His words were not entirely lacking in persuasiveness. Sorry to keep you waiting, Yoshino said, returning to his seat. He quickly wrote something in his notebook, then poked his bearded cheek with the tip of his pen. His beard looked wiry, and it was long and full, as if to compensate for the thinning of the top of his head. Now, where was I? He leaned forward, bringing his hirsute visage closer to Ando. He had a certain charisma that came through when he spoke. You were starting to tell me how Ryuji got involved. Right. Now, if you don't mind, what was your relationship with the late professor? We were classmates in med school. Okay, that's what I'd heard. Ando interpreted the remark to mean that Yoshino had run a check on him before contacting him. By the way, Mr. Yoshino, have you watched the tape yourself? The question had been weighing on Ando's mind for a while. You've got to be kidding me. Yeah, Yoshino said wide-eyed. You'd have met me in the autopsy room then. No, I don't have the guts. He chuckled. Of course, Ando had had a sneaking suspicion for some time now that a videotape was involved in these deaths. But never in his wildest dreams did he suspect the evidence of a video that killed anybody who watched it exactly a week's time. He still couldn't quite believe it. How could he? He couldn't accept such a thing, short of watching the video himself. Even then, he'd probably only truly believe it a week later at the moment death came for him. Not gonna lie. If somebody said this shit to me, yeah, I too would be like, you gotta be kidding me. Yoshino drank his now cold coffee, taking his time. He must have had gained a little leeway in his schedule because his movements no longer signaled haste. So why is Asakawa still alive? He watched the tape, didn't he? There was a note of scorn in Ando's voice. Asakawa might be catatonic, but he was still alive. That didn't seem to square with Yoshino's story. You hit the nail on the head there. That's exactly what's bothering me too, Yoshino said, leaning forward. I suppose the best thing to do is ask the man himself, but I tried that, and it got me nowhere. Yoshino too had visited the hospital of Shinagawa, and he had failed to communicate with Asakawa. Asakawa is the man from the first book, by the way. Then Yoshino seemed to have an idea. Maybe. He trailed off pretentiously. Maybe what? I think you know what I'm talking about. If we could get our hands on it. On what? Asakawa was a reporter for our weekly news magazine. Ando had no idea what Yoshino was getting at. I know. Well, he mentioned to me that he was putting together a comprehensive report on all this. I mean, the whole reason he got interested to begin with was that he thought he was onto a scoop. He teamed up with Takayama, and the two of them rushed off to Atami, and then to Oshima Island, hoping they'd find clues to unlock the riddle of the videotape. I think they found something. And I'll bet you anything that it's all written up and stored on a floppy disk. Yoshino turned his head, leaving Ando staring at his profile. A floppy disk. Oh my god. A floppy disk. Oh my god. Aha! Yoshino faced Ando again, this time with a bitter expression. I just don't know where it is. I couldn't find it in his apartment. Having said this, he stared off into space. Asakawa was hospitalized, and his wife and daughter were dead. The apartment was empty. Was Yoshino saying he'd broken in and searched it? His apartment? Yeah, well, the building's manager is an old softy. All I had to do was come up with a good excuse, and he let me right in with the master key. With the same thing Ando himself had done with the other day, out of concern for Mai, so he knew he couldn't criticize Yoshino's behavior. The motives may have been different, but in the end, they both done the same thing. They had ransacked apartments in their occupants' absence. I mean, to be fair, Yoshino knows Asakawa, and kind of weird about Ando doing it to Mai, not gonna lie, but they were supposed to, okay, yeah. Ando was supposed to meet Mai, I think, if I remember correctly, but he didn't show. Or she didn't show. It was really weird. Yoshino didn't look ashamed in the least, only annoyed. I searched every corner of that place, didn't find anything. Not his work processor, not the floppy disk. Yoshino bounced his knees with nervous energy. Then he noticed and placed a hand on the knee, flashing Ando a rueful smile. Ando was recalling the photos he'd been shown of the scene of Asakawa's incident. He remembered the one that showed the interior of the car from the vantage point of the driver's side window. The thing he understood to be a video deck sat in the passenger seat, wedged under the back of the seat where it had been pushed forward. On the floor on the passenger seat lay what looked like a laptop. The pair of black objects had made a deep impression on Ando, and they gave him an idea. He turned his head, desperately trying to think, pretending to watch the crowd flowing out of the station like a human tidal wave. Ando realized he knew where to find the report that could explain everything. No doubt Yoshino had searched Asakawa's apartment with great diligence, but the word processor and disk weren't there at all. Yoshino didn't know that Asakawa had brought them with him wherever he'd last been, that they were in the car at the time of the accident. Ando was now fairly confident that he could get his hands on that disk, and he had no intention of sharing the information with Yoshino. Okay, that's kind of a dick move. He'd decide whether or not to tell the media only after he'd read Asakawa's report. Right now, all he knew was that this smallpox-like virus had been found in all 7 of the corpses in question. Okay. How the fuck are you gonna do that? You're already pushing it with Mai, but you know somebody directly correlated with the guy that's currently in a coma. And you're not going to tell them anything. When this guy knows more than you. Okay, Ando. Okay, I see you. I see how you are. Okay, buddy. Okay, this guy. They weren't ready yet to announce their findings in professional circles. In fact, they were only beginning to put together a research team consisting mainly of Shuba and Yokodai people. If he went and let the media in on it at this stage, there was no telling what kind of panic they'd whip up. He had to proceed with utmost caution to make sure things didn't get out of hand. The rest of the meeting, Yoshino spent lobbying predictable questions at Ando. What were the results of the autopsy? What did he determine was the cause of death? Was any part of Yoshino's story suggestive in terms of the results of the autopsy? The reporter kept his face buried in his notebook as he went through his list. Ando tried to answer each question as politely and as unobjectively as he could. But all the while, his thoughts were lunging in another direction. He had to get his hands on that floppy disk right away. What did he need to do to make that happen? The next day was Saturday. This is chapter 6, by the way. After finishing 2 autopsies, Ando took aside the young cop who was there as a witness and asked him what happened to cars that had been in accidents. If a car had been in a wreck on an accident near the Oi Express exit of the Metropolitan Bayside Expressway, for instance, what was done with it? Well, first we'd inspect it. He was a trusty-looking young man with glasses. Ando had seen him several times before, but this was the first time he'd spoken to him. Then what? Then we returned it to the owner. What if it was a rental? We returned it to the rent-a-car agency, of course. Okay, there were 3 people aboard this car, a young couple and their daughter. They lived in a condo in Shinagawa, just the 3 of them. The wife and child died in the accident, and the husband is in critical condition. Now what happens to the items that were in the car? They'd be kept in temporary storage in the traffic division of the local precinct. For an accident that happened at the Oi off-ramp of the Metropolitan Expressway, what's the local precinct? The exit? Yeah, that's right, near the exit. No, I mean, was it in the expressway or off of it? They're different in jurisdictions. Ando thought back to the photos of the accident scene. He was certain it had happened on the expressway itself. He seemed to remember seeing the phrase Tokyo Harbor Tunnel Entrance written on a file somewhere. It was definitely on the expressway. Then it'd be the Metropolitan Expressway Traffic Patrol Unit. Ando had never heard the name before. Where's the headquarters? Shintomi. Alright, so the items would be stored there temporarily. What next? They'd contact the family and have someone come and get the items. Suppose, like I said, everybody in the family's dead? Even the siblings and parents of the man in the hospital? Ando knew nothing about Asakawa's parents and siblings. Judging from the man's age, there was a good chance that his parents were still alive. It raised the possibility that they were in the possession of whatever was in the car. Asakawa and Ryuji had been classmates in high school. Since Ryuji's parents lived in Sagami Ono, Asakawa's probably lived somewhere in that area too. In any case, the first thing Ando should do was look them up and contact them. I see. Thank you very much. Wild. Ando released the young cop and straight away said about locating Asakawa's parents. He determined that they were both alive and living in the Kurihara section of the city of Zama, not far of Sagami Ono. He placed a call and asked what had happened to the items from their son's car. Asakawa's father told him in a strained voice to call his eldest son, who lived in Kanda, in Tokyo. Kazuyuki, it turned out, was the youngest of 3 brothers. The oldest worked in the art book division of Shotoku, a major publisher, while the middle son was a junior high school Japanese teacher. Asakawa's father said that he had in fact received a call from the police asking him to come down and pick up some items that were keeping at the station. But instead of going to get them himself, he told them to contact his son in Kanda. Kanda wasn't too far from Shintomi, where the Metropolitan Expressway Traffic Patrol Unit had their headquarters. And Asakawa Sr. hadn't felt like lugging a word processor and a VCR home at his age. He was over 70. Damn! So he arranged with the police for his son to pick up the items. Ando's next move, then, was to contact Junichiro Asakawa, who lived with his wife in a condominium. When he finally managed to get in touch with him over the phone that evening, Ando came straight out and told him the situation, or most of it at least. He was afraid that if he aroused Junichiro's suspicions by slapping together a lie or a clumsy cover-up, he might never get his hands on that disc. On the other hand, he couldn't simply repeat the story Yoshino had told him. Ando didn't believe most of it himself, and Junichiro would surely think he was crazy. I would think somebody was crazy too if they told me, yeah, a haunted tape killed your brother. I wouldn't know how to even process that information to begin with. So he abridged things as he saw fit, ending by emphasizing that there was a possibility that Asakawa had left behind a document that might shed some light on what was happening. Speaking on behalf of the medical examiner's office, he said he'd really like to get his hands on the document and wondered if he might be allowed to make a copy of it. Please and thank you. I'm not sure there was anything like that in what I was given. Junichiro didn't sound entirely convinced. The way he spoke suggested that he hadn't yet taken a good look at the items. Is there a word processor? Yes, but I think it's broken. Was there a floppy disk inside it? To be honest, I haven't checked. I haven't even taken it out of the cardboard box he handed it to me in. Was there a video deck along with it? Yes, but I threw it away. Was that the wrong thing to do? Ando's breath caught. This fucking family! Okay, I don't want to get into spoilers if you're just getting into this book. But oh my god, the Asakawa family is kind of dumb, save for the baby. Save for the little baby. Oh my god. Oh my god. This fucking family. Oh my god. You know what? Fuck it. Spoilers for the first book. Because I don't care. So we all know Asakawa was the first one to see the tape. Okay, fine, whatever. Ryuji or him saw the tape. This was before they figured out that you have to show the person the tape. So was it? I silent. So I'm spoiling Ring because of what just happened in the book. So Asakawa and Ryuji saw the tape, and this was before they found out that you have to see the fucking that start. That's funny. So Asakawa and Ryuji saw the tape. This was before they figured out that you have to show the tape to somebody else in order to not die. Okay, fine, whatever. So, Asakawa's wife, this dumb bitch, she watched the tape, mind you. She also watched the tape with her baby in her lap. So, Miss Sadako had a 2-for-1 deal. She got the baby and the wife. And then so they died, and Asakawa was trying to save them. R.I.P. I feel so bad for him though. He did everything for his wife and child, only for them to fucking die. All because his goddamn wife. Anyways, so now, since they were in a car, obviously it says in the car. Well, it's not really spoilers because it's a car crash in the book of last book. So Asakawa's brother got a hold of the belongings that were in the car, but he threw away the key item the damn video deck that had the tape in it. Motherfucker. Oh my god, this is fucking well, no, hold on, wait, the wife wasn't really, you know what, no, she was married to him, so she was fucking dumb. Oh my god. Okay, anyways. Oh my god, this family. Oh my god. Anyways. Back to reading. Oh my god, he fucking threw it away. Oh my god. Okay. I can see why he'd be carrying around the word processor because of his job, but why did he have a VCR with him? Excuse me, but did you say you threw it away? Yes, it was a total wreck. I'd arranged garbage pickup for a TV the other day, but I had them take the VCR away at the same time. It was beyond repair. Anyway, I doubt Kazuyuki will mind. Oh, he most definitely will mind. If he ever wakes up. Ando had almost caught his two quarries, and now at the last minute, one had eluded him. There had been a good chance that the videotape that held the key to all this had been inside the VCR, and with his luck, he'd hoped to get his hands on both it and the floppy disk. He was kicking himself for not having contacted Junichiro sooner. Besides the VCR, there wouldn't happen to have been a videotape, would there? Ando said with a little prayer as he asked. I don't know. All I saw was the word processor, the VCR, and two black leather gym bags that probably belonged to Shizu and little Yoko. I haven't opened them. Ando made sure Junichiro understood that he wanted to see them as soon as possible. Would you mind if I paid you a visit? That's fine, Junichiro agreed surprisingly quickly. How about tomorrow? Sunday. Let's see, I'm playing golf with one of my writers, but I should be back by 7. Well then, 7 it is. Ando made a note of the time and underlined it several times. Like, why you gotta underline it several times? One underline is enough, buddy. It's fine. Just one underline. At just after 7 o'clock on Sunday evening, Ando called at Junichiro's condo in the Sarugaku section of Kanda. The neighborhood didn't feel very residential. Junichiro's building was surrounded by office blocks. The area was eerily quiet on Sunday evenings. I wonder why. Ando rang the bell and heard a man's voice from behind the door. Ask, who is it? This is Ando. I called yesterday. The door opened immediately, and Ando was ushered inside. Junichiro was lounging around in a sweatsuit, and his hair was wet. He must have just gotten home from golf and taken a shower. Somehow, from his voice on the phone, Ando had imagined him as a tall, nervous man, but in person, Junichiro was heavy-set and wore a genial expression. As Junichiro led the way into the apartment, Ando reflected that, of the 3 brothers, the eldest was an editor, the second a Japanese teacher, and the third a reporter for a major news organization. They'd all chosen fields that had them dealing with language, with writing on a daily basis. Most likely the eldest had been influential in this regard. Ando himself had been inspired to enter medicine by his older brother, who became a high school biology teacher. Junichiro went to the closet in the hall and took out a cardboard box. The gym bags and the word processor had been stuffed into it. So, you'd like to take a look? Junichiro sat down cross-legged on the floor and pushed the box in Ando's direction. Thanks, I would. Ando first took out the word processor, jotting down the make and model. The machine's shells seemed to have been rather severely damaged in the crash. The top wouldn't open, and pressing the power button elicited no response. Standing vertically on his knee, Ando noticed an eject button there on the side. It belonged to a slot, and peering into it was a blue floppy disk. He almost shouted for joy as he pressed the eject button. The machine produced a click that sounded to Ando like bingo. He took out the disc and held it in his palm for a moment, examining it back and front. The label hadn't been affixed, so there was no title to be seen. But Ando knew immediately that this was what he'd been searching for. It had sounded right popping out of the slot. He wanted to read the disc as soon as he could, and he said to Junichiro, "I'd like to check out what's on here. I'm afraid that this machine isn't capable like mine." Junichiro wouldn't be able to use his word processor to open the files on the disc. "In that case, would you mind if I borrowed the disc for 2 or 3 days? It's alright with me, but I'll return it to you as soon as I'm done with it." "What's on the disc anyway?" Anno's excitement was evidently communicated itself. Junichiro suddenly seemed curious. Anno shook his head. "I don't know exactly." "Well, I'd like it back as soon as possible." Now it appeared that Junichiro wanted to read it too. Maybe his editorial instinct had been stirred. I mean, it's also one of the last things that, your little brother has. Because, he's fucking catatonic. You don't know if he'll ever wake up, so. Yeah, I'd want it back too. Ando dropped the disc into his jacket pocket and knew a sense of relief, but at the same time, he was seized with a new desire. Those gym bags. He knew it was futile to hope. But he couldn't rule out those possibilities that the videotape was in one of them. Would it be too much to ask if I could see what's in there? He tried to choose his words carefully, somewhat embarrassed at the idea of going through a woman's belongings. "I don't think there's anything in there." Junichiro laughed, but he handed over the bags. When he looked inside, Ando's faint hope of finding the tape was finally dashed. Mostly the bags contained clothes and disposable diapers. Not what he was looking for. Just as he'd feared, the tape had been inside the VCR when it was trash. Still, he'd gotten his hands on the floppy disk, and he had to count that as success. He could hardly stand still as he took his leave. He'd check around at work to see if anybody had a machine that could read the disc. He couldn't wait to see what was on it. I don't know. You're working right now. Oh my god, I'm sorry, my dude. Oh, well, I'm glad you had me on in the background. Thank you. Yes, you did say that. Thank you for stopping by. Hey, at least I'm reading and not playing. I'm glad I'm finally getting back into reading. Alright, chapter 7. Reading is good, yes. Okay. Ando poked his head into the pathology department office to see if Miyashita was in. But before he had a chance to say anything, Miyashita called out to him. "Hey, just a man I wanted to see. Tell me, what do you think of this?" Miyashita was holding a printout of something, and he beckoned to Ando with his other hand. Beside him stood Nemoto, an assistant in the biochem lab. Nemoto and Miyashita were built so alike that anybody who happened to see them together couldn't help but laugh. From their height and weight, 5'3" and easily over 170 pounds, to the length of their legs, their girth, their faces, even their taste in clothes and their high voices, they were like two peas in a pod. Hey, I didn't know you had a twin. Ando uttered the same joke he always did as he approached them. Oh my god, he's this type of man. Please, Dr. Ando, don't lump me together with this guy, said Nemoto, grimacing. He's like, shit, don't do this, bro. But it couldn't have been too awful to be told he took after his colleague, 2 years his senior. After all, Miyashita was like both. After all, Miyashita was like for both his personality and his learning, and had been pegged as a future candidate for full professor. Good for him. Good for him. Everybody keeps telling us we look alike, Nemoto. I'm telling you, it's getting to be a pain in the butt. Why don't you go on a diet? Miyashita elbowed the younger man's paunch. Well, if I go on a diet, you have to go on one too. And then we'll be right back where we started. Then Miyashita offered Ando the printout he was holding, as if to put an end to the stale routine. Ando spread out the printout he'd been given. He understood its content at a glance. It showed the result of running a snippet of DNA through a sequencer. All life on Earth consists of one or more cells containing DNA, or in some cases, RNA. The nuclei of these cells contain molecular compounds known as nucleic acids. There are two types of nucleic acids: DNA. I ain't gonna say this fucking word. Or. Okay. Deoxyribonucleic acid. Deoxyribonucleic. Yeah, that fucking word. And RNA. Ribonucleic acid. Why the hell is the first word more complicated than the second word? You know, man, I hate spelling. I hate words. These play different roles. DNA is a compound in which genetic information is stored in the chromosome. It takes the form of two long threads twisted about one another in a spiral. A shape known as a double helix. The sum total of a life form's genetic information is inscribed within the double structure. This genetic information is like a set of blueprints for the construction of specialized proteins. Each gene is a blueprint. In other words, genes and DNA are not the same thing. A gene is a unit of information. What's wild about these books is one thing I really like about this book is that it's wild, that it goes into the science of it. And it's very interesting because you're just like, oh shit, it's going into like science and shit, because that's basically what it is. And it's wild on how it all like correlates. Because smallpox were supposed to be eradicated like years ago. And Miss Sadako, all her victims have like what looks to be like the first stages of smallpox, which, as I said, which should be eradicated, but that's like her little calling card thing. It's when I tell you the books are wild, and it's really crazy on how they are connecting a lot of things, especially with DNA and whatnot. So what exactly is written on these blueprints? The letters that make up the inscriptions for are four chemical compounds known as bases. Adenine, A. Guanine, G. Cytosine, C. Thymine. Or T. I'm not a fucking scientist. I don't know how to say these words properly. Anyways, cut me some slack, okay? Or in the case of RNA, uracil, U. These four bases work in sets of three called codons, which are translated into amino acids. For example, the codon AAC makes asparagine, the codon GCA makes alanine, etc. If anybody knows this shit, I mean, you probably know what the hell it does. I'm like lost. I'm just reading what's in the book. I'm like, okay, cool. This makes this thing. Okay, cool. Moving on. Proteins are conglomerations of hundreds of these amino acid molecules, of which there are 20 types. Damn, 20. This means that the blueprint for one protein must contain an array of bases equal in number to the number of amino acids molecules times 3. Wow. The blueprints called the gene can be thought of then as basically a long line of letters, looking something like T C T C T A T A C C A G T T G G A T T A T. Say that 5 times fast. Translated, this signifies a series of amino acids that run TCT, serine or ser, CTA, leucine or leu, TAC, tyrosine or tyr, CAG, glutamine, GLN, glun, TTG, leucine, leu again, GAA, glutamic acid, glue, AAT, asparagine, ASN, TAT, tyrosine, etc., etc. Ando glanced again at the base codes covering the printout. The 4 letters A, T, G, and C lined up seemingly at random across the page. Segments of 3 rows had been highlighted so as to stand out from the rest. What's this? Miyashita winked at Nemoto as if to say, you tell him. This is the analysis of the segment of DNA taken from the virus found in Ryuji Takayama's blood. Okay, so what's this? You found a rather strange sequence of bases, something we've only seen in Takayama's virus. And that's what's highlighted here. That is correct. Ando took a closer look at the first highlighted series of letters. Hold on, I'm gonna put this shit up because Y'all are because I can't explain it. I can't explain it myself. So I'm gonna just take a picture of it and then. Okay, so what I'm about to put up are like the two are like the chart that they are showing in these pages right now. One second. Yeah, this is the first one. Oh. Hi, hello. That was from the other day. Oh shit. Okay. So these are the charts that they gave. Oh god. So yeah, these are the charts. Yeah, as you can see, these are the charts. People who know what this means, yeah, these are the charts. All right. So those are the charts, and then he looked at the next highlighted portion and compared it to the first. He realized it was exactly the same sequence, in a group of not even 1,000 bases. The exact same sequence occurred twice. above between number 535 and 576, and again between number 8, 815, and number 856. One can observe the repetition of the 42 bases. Base triplets, codons, however the fuck you say it, are translated into amino acids according to the principle outlined in the chart above. For example, TCT is serine, AAT is asparagine, GAA is glutamic acid. Stop signifies the end of the gene. The beginning code is ATG. Below are the abbreviated and full names of the 20 amino acids. I show the chart. The chart. Ando shifted his gaze from the printout to Nemoto's face. No matter where we slice it, we always find this identical sequence. How many of these are there? Bases, you mean? Yeah, 42. 42, wow. 42. So 14 codons, right? That's not very many. We think it means something. Nemoto said, shaking his head. But, Dr. Ando, the strange thing is... Miyashita interrupted. This meaningless repetition was only found in the virus collected from Ryuji Takayama's blood and not from the other two victims. He threw up his hands in a gesture of perplexity. In other words, Ando tried to find a suitable analogy. Suppose 3 people, one being Ryuji, had copies of Shakespeare's King Lear. Then suppose that Ryuji's copy, and only his copy, had a meaningless string of letters sandwiched in between the lines. There were 42 bases, and they worked in sets of 3, each set corresponding to one amino acid. If you assign each of the sets a letter, you'd have a series of 14 letters. And these 14 repeated letters were found on every page of the play, inserted at random. If you knew from the beginning that the play was King Lear, of course, it would possibly go back and find the meaningless parts that had been interpolated and highlighted then. So what do you think? Miyashita looked to be sincerely interested in Ando's opinion. A true scientist, he was always more excited when confronted with the inexplicable. What do I think? I'd have to know more before I could say anything. The 3 of them fell silent, glancing at one another's faces. Ando felt awkward, still holding the printout. Something was tugging at his consciousness. In order to figure out what it was, he needed time to sit down and study the meaningless string of bases. He had an unmistakable premonition that there was something there. The question was, what? And if this meaningless base sequence had indeed been interpolated, when had it happened? Was the virus that had invaded Ryuji's body just different? Or had it mutated in Ryuji's body, with the 14 codon strings appearing here and there as a result of the mutation? Was that even possible? And if it was, what did it mean? Shit, if anything, one thing you could trust is viruses evolving. An oppressive silence fell over the 3 men. No amount of speculation at this point could tell them how to interpret these findings. It was Miyashita who broke the silence. By the way, did you come here for a reason? Ando had been so intrigued by the discovery that his original errand had slipped his mind. Right, I almost forgot. He opened up his briefcase, took out his planner, and showed Miyashita and Nemoto a slip of paper. I was wondering if anyone here had a word processor of this model. Miyashita and Nemoto looked at the model name written on the paper. It was a fairly common machine. Does it have to be exactly the same model? As long as it's the same brand, the model probably isn't important. Basically, it's just a question of compatibility for a floppy disk. Compatibility? Compatibility! God. I can't speak. And I'm reading books. Welcome to my live stream, everybody. Yes. Ando took a floppy disk from his briefcase. I need to make a hard copy and a soft copy of the files on this disk. It's not saved in MS-DOS. I take it? I don't think so. Nemoto clapped his hands as if he had just remembered something. Hey, one of the staff members in my department, Ueda, I think, has this very model. Yay, somebody knows a guy. Do you suppose he'd let me borrow it? Ando hesitated. He'd never met Ueda. I don't imagine there'd be a problem. He's fresh out of school. Nemoto spoke with confidence of a senior staff member who knew that a new resident would do anything he asked. Thanks. No problem at all. Why don't we go over there right now? I think he's there. This was music to Ando's ears. He couldn't wait to print out whatever was on the disc. Great, let's go. Ando dropped the disc back into his jacket pocket. Then waving to Miyashita, he followed Nemoto out of the I can't read or speak or whatever. The pathology department. I hate it here. Ando, Nemoto walked side by side down the med school's dim hallway. Ando wore his lab coat unfastened in front, its tails swept back behind him, with his hands in his pockets of his jacket clutching the disc. Neither Miyashita nor Nemoto had asked about it. Ando wasn't trying to keep it a secret. Had Miyashita asked, he'd intended to give him an honest answer. If they'd known it might hold the key to this whole mystery, no doubt both men would have been at his heels right now. For real, though. Of course, Ando hadn't seen what was on the disc yet. There was always a possibility that it held something else entirely. He simply wouldn't know until he managed to bring it up on the monitor. Still, it felt right in his hand. The disc was warm from being in his pocket. It was near body temperature. Its touch seemed to tell him that it held living words. Nemoto opened the door to the biochemistry lab. Ando took the disc out of his pocket, switched it to his left hand, and held the door open with his right. Hey, Ueda. Ueda. Oh, I'm saying that right. I feel so bad. Nemoto beckoned to a skinny young man seated in a corner of the room. Yes? Ueda swiveled in his chair to face Nemoto, but didn't stand up. Nemoto approached him, smiling, and put his hands on Ueda's shoulder. Are you using your word processor right now? No, not really. Great. Would you mind if Dr. Ando had borrowed it for a while? Ueda looked up at Ando and then bowed. Hello. Sorry about this. I've got a disk I need to access and it's not compatible with my machine. Ando moved to Nemoto's side, holding up the disk. Go right ahead, said Ueda, picking up the word processor from where it sat on the floor at his feet and laying it sideways on the desk. Do you mind if I check it right here, just to make sure? Not at all. He opened the word processor lids and turned it on. Soon the initial menu appeared on the screen. From among the options displayed, Ando chose Documents, then inserted the disk. The next screen gave him two options, new document and open document. Ando moved the cursor to the second option and hit return. With a whir, the machine started to read the disk. Finally, the names on the files stored on the disk appeared on the screen. Okay, so it just says ring 9 and then all the way down to 1. Then it has 1990. So it's the year 1990 all the way down. October all the way down. And then the 21st, the 20th, 19th, 17th, 15th, 12th, the 7th, the 4th, and the 2nd. Ando read the file name aloud in a delirium. Ring, 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 ring. Ring. What the hell? The same word that I got from solving the code that popped out of Ryuji's body. Are you alright? Nomoto sounded worried. He was peering at Ando's suddenly dazed expression. Ando could barely manage to nod. There was no way this could be a coincidence. Asakawa had composed a report detailing this whole strange train of events, saved it in 9 parts, and entitled it Ring. And then the title had extruded from Ryuji's belly. How to explain this? There is no way. Ando was in a state of complete denial. Ryuji's body was completely empty. He was like a tin man. Am I saying he slipped me a message from his abdominal cavity? That he was trying to tell me of this existence of these files? Ando recalled the way Ryuji's face had looked right after the autopsy. His square-jawed face had been smiling. Ando had expected that any minute he'd start laughing at him, stark naked on the table, jowls shaking. Deep down, Ando could feel Yoshino's outlandish story starting to take on the feel of reality. Maybe it all was true. Maybe there really was a videotape that killed you 7 days after you watched it. Bum bum bum. Who knows? See, how long do I have to go? Oh yeah, I don't have long. Okay. I'm probably gonna finish, yeah. There's not long left in this section, so I'll probably read it until I finish. It's not that long. The word processor buzzed ceaselessly as it printed out page after page. Ando tore each page from the printer as it emerged and read through it quickly. Each page was single-spaced, but still Ando was able to read faster than the printer could spit them out. Wanting a hard copy, he decided to print it all out instead of reading it on the screen. Now he found himself getting frustrated by the 2 or 3 minutes it took each page to be printed. He'd ended up borrowing Ueda's machine and bringing it home with him. A quick check had revealed that the total report was close to 100 pages. More than he could reasonably print out there in the lab. He had no choice but to stay up late at home. Now he was at the edge of page 21 of the manuscript, alternating between reading it and taking bites of the dinner he'd picked up at the convenience store on the way home. What he'd read so far followed faithfully to outline Yoshino had given him the week before, but it differed from what Yoshino had told him after lunch at the cafe in that it contained specific times and places. As a result, it was a good deal more persuasive. The reporterly style, no frills, also made it harder to disbelieve. While investigating the simultaneous deaths by heart attack of 4 young people in Tokyo and Kanagawa Prefecture on the evening of September 15th, Asakawa had come up with the idea that the culprit was some kind of virus. Scientifically speaking, it was the obvious conclusion. And since autopsies on the 4 bodies had indeed revealed a virus that closely resembled smallpox, it turned out that Asakawa's hunch had been right. It had been Asakawa's guess that since the 4 had died at the same moment, they must have picked up the same virus together at the same place. He'd figured that the key to the whole case must lie in figuring out where they were exposed to the virus. That is, in determining the route of transmission. Asakawa had succeeded in finding out when and where the 4 had been together. August 29th, exactly a week before their deaths, at South Hakone Pacific Land, in a rented cabin, Villa Log Cabin number B4. The next page, page 20, started with Kazuyuki Asakawa himself heading toward the cabin in question. He took the bullet train to Atami, then rented a car and took the Atami-Kanami Highway to the Highland Resort. Rain and darkness limited the visibility and the mountain road was awful. He'd made reservations for cabin B4 at noon, but it was past 8 at night when he finally checked in. So this was where those 4 kids had spent the night. The thought gave Asakawa a jolt of fear. Exactly a week after they'd stayed in the cabin, they were dead. He knew it was possible that the same spectral hand would touch him too. But he couldn't overcome his reportedly curiosity and ended up searching B4 from top to bottom. From something the kids had written in a notebook on the property, Asakawa determined that they had watched a videotape that night. So he went to the manager's office to search for the tape. He found an unlabeled, unboxed tape lying on the bottom shelf. Was this what he was looking for? With the manager's permission, he took the tape back to cabin B4, and with no way of knowing what it contained, he inserted it in the VCR in the living room and watched it all the way through. At first, everything was dark. Asakawa described the opening scene like this. In the middle of the black screen, a pinpoint of light began to flicker. It gradually expanded, jumping around to the left and right, before finally coming to rest on the left-hand side. Then it branched out, becoming a frayed bundle of lights crawling around like worms. Ando looked up from the page. Based on what he was reading, he was able to get a reasonably clear image of what had been on the screen. Reading Asakawa's description of the opening, an image popped into his head that he felt like he'd seen somewhere before. A firefly flitting around on the dark screen, growing gradually larger. Then the point of light splayed out like the fibers of a paintbrush. It was a short scene, but one that he could remember seeing, and recently at that. It didn't take long for the memory to come to him. It was when he'd gone to Mai's apartment to try and track her down. He'd found a videotape still in her VCR, and he'd pressed the play button. The one with Frank Sinatra, Liza Minnelli, etc. Written on the label in a man's hand. The first few seconds of the tape fit this description perfectly. But on the tape in Mai's apartment, this scene had only lasted a few seconds before the screen suddenly became a lot brighter. In what had evidently been an attempt to erase whatever was on the tape, Mai had recorded morning variety shows, samurai melodrama reruns, whatever, until the tape ran out. Ando immediately figured out what that meant. Somehow, probably through Ryuji, Mai had acquired the problem tape and watched it in her apartment. Then, when she'd finished, she'd eradicated it and whatever it was from the tape. She must have had her reasons, but she hadn't been able to erase the very beginning of the tape, so those first few seconds had remained there, lurking. Did it mean that the tape Asakawa found in Villa Log Cabin had somehow made its way into Mai's hands? Fucking probably. Ando tried to organize his thoughts. No, that can't be. The tape Asakawa found and the tape Mai had were clearly two different things. According to the report, the one in the cabin was unlabeled, but the one in Mai's VCR was the title written on it in black marker, which meant it must have been a copy. The one in the cabin was the original, and the one in Mai's place a copy. So that tape had been copied, erased, disguised, transported, a dizzying series of changes. In Ando's mind, the tape, occupying a point between the animate and the inanimate, began to resemble a virus. So, was Mai's disappearance a result of her having watched that tape? The possibility worried him. She hadn't been back to her room since then. She hadn't been showing up at school, and she hadn't even called her mother. On the other hand, he hadn't heard anything about a young woman found dead from unexplained causes. Ando let his mind wander for a while, considering all the things that could have befallen her. Maybe she died alone someplace, unbeknownst to anybody. The thoughts pained him. She was only 22. The fact that he could feel the first twinges of a crush on her only made it harder to bear. Poor guy. Sort of. The printer finally came to the end of another page, with a noise that snapped Ando out onto his reverie. In any case now, was no time to be borrowing trouble. At the moment, he'd be better off finding out what was on the tape first. Buddy, you do not want to know what's on that tape. The next few pages contain a thorough description of the contents of the videotape. As he read, Ando could see a TV screen in his mind filled with shifting images. What do I have? I don't have much. Something red and vicious spurted across the screen. This was followed by a view of a mountain that he could tell at a glance was an active volcano. Lava flowed from its mouth. The earth rumbled. The eruption lit up the night sky. Then the scene was suddenly cut off, replaced by a white background in front of which the character for mountain, written in black, faded in and out of view. Then a scene of two dice bouncing around on a bowl. Finally, a human figure appeared on the screen. A wrinkled old woman sat on a tatami mat. She was facing the camera and saying something. She spoke in a nearly incomprehensible dialect, but he could tell, more or less from the sound of her words, that she was predicting somebody's future, warning him or her. Next, a newborn baby wailing. There was no discernible link between scenes. One followed another with all the abruptness and randomness of someone flipping over cards. The infant disappeared, replaced by hundreds of faces, filled the screen and multiplying as if by cellular division, all against the background of a multitude of voices antagonizing accusations. Liar! Fraud! Then the old television set, displaying the character, Sada. Then a man's face appeared. He was gasping for breath and dripping with sweat. Behind him, he could see a lush thicket of trees. His eyes were red and full of bloodlust. His mouth was contorted with screams and drool. His bare shoulders were deeply gouged, and blood flowed from the wound. Then came again, from nowhere in particular, the cry of a baby. In the center of the screen was a full moon, from which fell fist-sized stones, landing with dull thuds. Finally, more words appeared on the screen. Those who have viewed these images are fated to die at this exact hour 1 week from now. If you do not wish to die, you must follow these instructions exactly. And then this scene changed entirely. Instead of the prescribed method for avoiding certain death, the screen now showed a common television commercial for mosquito coils. Ugh. The ad ended and the previous eeriness returned, or rather the memory of it. At the end of this series of bizarre visions, Asakawa had managed to understand exactly two things. First, whoever watched this tape was doomed to die in exactly a week. And second, there was a way to avoid this fate, but had been deliberately recorded over. The four kids who'd watched the video first had erased it in a fit of malice or mischief. It was all Asakawa could do to slip the tape into his bag and flee cabin B4. Ando took a deep breath and laid the manuscript aside. Holy shit. In his report, Asakawa had given a painstakingly elaborate account of the strange 20 minutes of images on the tape. He'd made every effort to recreate, using only words, what the video conveyed directly through sound and visuals, and he'd largely succeeded. The scene still swirled around in Ando's mind, as vividly as he'd seen and heard them himself. He sighed again, suddenly exhausted. Or maybe it wasn't fatigue. Perhaps it was that he now felt Asakawa's fear as his own and wanted somehow to push it away. But even a moment's pause only whetted his desire to know more. Taking a sip of tea, he'd picked up the next page of the report and started reading ahead, even faster than before. The first thing Asakawa did upon returning to Tokyo was to call Ryuji Takayama and tell him what had happened. Asakawa had neither the time nor the courage to solve this thing alone. He needed a reliable partner, and so naturally his thoughts turned to Ryuji, whom he'd known since high school. He also approached Yoshino, but Yoshino refused to watch the video. Smartest man in this whole series. He wanted to avoid doing so. Regardless of whether or not he actually believed in it, if there was even a slim chance that calamity would befall him as a result of watching the video, he wanted to avoid doing so. As I said, the smartest man in this whole series so far. But not Ryuji. As soon as he heard about this video that'd kill in a week's time anyone who watched it, the first words out of his mouth were, "First, let's have a look at this video." Famous last words. So Ryuji watched the video in Asakawa's apartment, fascinated. And then it was over. He asked Asakawa to make him a copy. And when it was over, he asked Asakawa to make him a copy. Who the hell wants a copy of that? Not me. The word copy made Ando sit up and take notice. Now he thought he figured out the route the tape had traveled. The original tape from Villa Log Cabin most likely stayed in Asakawa's possession. It had been in the VCR in Asakawa's car at the time of the wreck, had passed to Asakawa's brother Junichiro, and had been thrown away. There was one more tape, the one in Mai's apartment, the one with only the very beginning remaining. This was probably the copy Asakawa had made for Ryuji that first night. It had a title on the label written in thick letters in a man's hand. It was probably Asakawa's handwriting. When Ryuji had asked Asakawa to make him a copy instead of using a brand new tape, Asakawa had recycled an old tape in which he'd originally recorded a music program. This had passed through Ryuji's hands into Mai's. That much made sense, but when had Mai received it? Mai had never mentioned having the tape to Ando, which meant Ando supposed that she'd come across it by chance several days after Ryuji's death and watched it not knowing it was dangerous. Sounds like a her problem, not gonna lie. To be... Would I be curious? Yeah, but at the same time, I don't know. I most likely probably wouldn't. So Ryuji took the copy of the tape back to his apartment and started working on figuring out the erased messages. He and Asakawa called this the charm. Both men wondered what this weird recording was doing in Villa Lodge cabin before. At first he thought that it had been a shot with the video camera and then left there, but that turned out not to be the case. 3 days before the unfortunate youths, a family had stayed in B4. They'd put a tape in the VCR and set it to record. He'd then forgotten about it and left it there when they went home. So the images on the tape had not been shot elsewhere, and the tape brought to the cabin. Rather, some sort of unknown transmission had been captured on the tape when the machine was recording. Miss Sadako, you menace of a woman. Miss Sadako, props to you. Props to you, girl. Not gonna lie. Props to you, Miss Sadako. Next people on the scene had been the 4 young victims. With time on their hands, they decided to watch a video. When they went to turn on the VCR, out popped the tape. They'd watched it. The threat at the end must have amused them. Like, we're really going to die in a week if we don't do what it says. So they decided to play a trick by erasing the solution. That should scare the next guests. Of course, the kids never really believed in the tape's curse. To be honest, yeah. Yeah, in all honesty, yeah, I could understand why. Because who the hell is going to take a videotape seriously? Like, come on. Like, a videotape threatening me? Like, come on, be honest. Who was going to believe that? Not me. If they had, they never would have pulled such a stunt. In any case, the tape was found the next day by the manager, who put it on the shelf in the office, where it stayed unnoticed by anyone until Asakawa's arrival. So, how had those images gotten onto the deck while it was recording? It occurred to Asakawa that some maniac might have hijacked the airwaves, so he tried to pinpoint the source of such a broadcast. Meanwhile, when Asakawa was out of the house, his wife and daughter found the video still in the VCR and watched it. No! His wife found it! And she had the brightest fucking idea to watch it when she was told not to. Now, Asakawa was urged on by the desire to save not only his life, but also those of his family. Then, Ryuji made a startling discovery. Watching the tape over and over at home, he had a flash of inspiration. He made a chart and found that the tape could be broken down into 12 scenes, which fell into 2 groups. Abstract scenes that seem to consist of what might be called mental imagery, and real scenes that seem to have been seen through an actual pair of eyes. For example, the volcanic eruption and the man's face were clearly things that had really been seen, while the firefly-like light in the darkness at the beginning of the tape looked like something conjured up by the mind, like something out of a dream. So Ryuichi called the two groups real and abstract, for comparison's sake. Upon further investigation, he noticed that in the real scenes, there were instances in which the screen was covered by what looked like a black veil, just for a split second. In the real scenes, these instances occurred at the rate of about 15 per minute, while in the abstract scene, they didn't appear at all. What did this mean? Ryuichi concluded that the black veil was in reality a blink. It appeared in the scenes that were seen with actual eyes and not in the sequences that were only seen in the mind's eye. Not only that, the frequency of the blacked out matched the average eye blinking frequency of a female. It seemed safe then to consider them eye blinks, which led naturally to the conclusion that the images on the videotape had not been captured by exposure in a video camera, but rather taken from the vision and imagination of an individual and placed on the tape by thought projection. Dead ass, if anybody told this to me, I'd be like, you're fucking insane. Okay, moving on. Ando had real trouble believing this part. The idea that a person could mentally imprint images onto a videotape was simply preposterous. Brother, I feel you. He might be willing, just barely, to allow the possibility of a mentally imprinting photographic film by moving images. Hi, Darcel. How are you? I'm not even in the middle. Oh my god, I've been like onto the side like this whole time. Oh my god. There we go. I'm good. You know, just reading horror novels. And if you're curious, I'm reading Spiral, which is the sequel book to Ring. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it's the novel that inspired the horror franchise. It's a wild. This book is. This is the sequel. The first one is wild in itself. He might be willing, just barely, to allow the possibility of mentally imprinting photographic film, but moving images? That was an entirely different setup. First of all, in order to press on, Ando had to lay this point aside for the moment, even as he admired Ryuji's perspicacity. Assuming that someone had recorded the tape paranormally, the next question was, who? Asakawa and Ryuji concentrated on that point, heading to the Tetsuzo Miura Memorial Hall in Kamakura. A researcher into parapsychological phenomena, Miura had devoted his life to tracking down paranormals from all over Japan. The files contained his findings were now housed in his memorial. The two men got permission to examine those files, over 1,000 in number, thinking that a psychic with powers strong enough to project moving images onto videotape couldn't have escaped Professor Miyoda's notice. And, after several hours of searching, they found a likely candidate. Her name was Sadako Yamamura. She'd been born in the town of Sashikiji on Izu Oshima Island. According to the entry in her file, at the age of 10, she was already able to project the characters Yama, mountain, and Sada, elements from her name, onto a piece of film. These very characters had appeared on the video. Certain that this Sadako Yamamura was who they were looking for, Ryuji and Asakawa boarded a boat for Izu Oshima the next morning. They hoped that learning more about her upbringing and personality would illuminate some of the secrets of the videotape. Sadako was threatening whoever looked at her images with death in order to get the viewer to do something. The tape itself embodied her wish for that action to be undertaken, which made it crucial that they find out what Sadako desired. At this point, Ryuji already had an inkling that Sadako Yamamura was no longer alive. It was his belief that on the brink of death, she had unleashed her final, unfulfilled desire in the form of a psychic projection, meaning to relay her wish to someone else. Her deep-seated hatred had ended up on the videotape. Totes to her. Between the assistance of the Oshima stringer for the Daily News and the help of Yoshino in Tokyo, with whom they'd stayed in frequent contact, Asakawa and Ryuji managed to piece together a profile of Sadako Yamamura. She was born in 1947, the daughter of Shizuko Yamamura, a one-time paranormal who had made it a big but temporary splash in the national media, with Enhei Hachiro Ikoma, an assistant professor of psychiatry at Taito University who had gotten into research of parapsychology with Shizuko as his subject. At first, the trio of Ikoma, Shizuko, and Sadako had been received by the public with simple curiosity and in fact had become media darlings after a fashion. But once a certain prestigious academic society had pronounced Shizuko's powers fake, the masses turned on them and they became subjects to violent attacks in the media. Hei Hachiro was hounded out of the university and eventually came down with tuberculosis, while Shizuko suffered nervous attacks and finally threw herself into Mount Mihara, the volcano on Izu Oshima. R.I.P. R.I.P. to Sadako's mom. The fact she threw herself into a volcano, that's also what gets me. Like, straight yeeted herself. Sadako was taken in by some relatives on the island where she lived until she graduated from high school. Once in 4th grade, she gained some notoriety within the school by predicting an eruption of Mount Mihara, but aside from that, she didn't display any of the power she'd inherited from her mother. On leaving high school, she moved to Tokyo, where she joined a theater troupe in hopes of making it as an actress. It was Yoshino who picked up her trail from there. Asakawa called Yoshino from the island and asked him to find the troop's rehearsal space in Yotsuya, Tokyo. He did, and once there, he found out more about Sadako's true nature from a man named Arima, a leader of the troop. It had been 25 years since Sadako had been a member of this company, but he recalled her very well. She seemed to have some sort of supernatural power. She could project images at will onto the screen of an unplugged television. If this was true, then Sadako's powers far outstripped her mother's. While at the rehearsal space, Yoshino succeeded in obtaining a photo of Sadako. They still had her resume on file, and it contained 2 black and white photos from when she joined. One was from the waist up, while the other was a full-length shot. Both revealed Sadako had perfectly balanced features that went beyond the word beautiful. Yoshino was unable to determine what became of Sadako after she left the theater troupe, so he faxed the photos and the other information he'd gathered to Asakawa at the Daily News, Izu Oshima's bureau. When he read the facts, he found out that Sadako's trail had gone cold. Asakawa was devastated. If they couldn't find her, how could they hope to figure out the charm? Valid. Once again, it was Ryuji who had a flash of inspiration. He realized that it might not be necessary to follow Sadako's every move. Instead, maybe they should return their attention to the scene. Villa log cabin number B4, and try to figure out why the images had shown up there. She had to have some sort of connection with the place. They realized that all the buildings of South Hakone Pacific Land were new. It wasn't impossible that something else had once stood there. Asakawa contacted Yoshino in Tokyo and asked him to try a new line of investigation. Find out what had occupied the ground before the resort. Yoshino faxed him the next morning. It turned out that there had once been a tuberculosis sanatorium on the site. He even managed to send them a plan of the facility's layout. He also attached a file with the name, address, and resume of one Jotaro Nagao, aged 57, a GP and pediatrician with a practice in Atami. For a period of 5 years, from 1962 to 1967, he had worked in the South Hakone Sanatorium. The suggestion seemed to be that any further information about the sanatorium would be best gotten from Nagao. So, armed only with what they'd learned from Yoshino, Asakawa and Ryuji took a high-speed ferry for Atami. It was 1 week to the day since Asakawa had watched the video. If they didn't figure out the charm by 10 that evening, Asakawa would die. Ryuji's deadline was 10 o'clock the next night, and Asakawa's wife and daughter's time would be up at 11 on the morning after. The 2 men climbed back onto their rented car and headed off to find Dr. Nagao's office. Their hopes to gain even a tidbit of information from him were granted in spades. When they finally came face to face with the doctor, both Asakawa and Ryuji recognized him. Near the end of the tape, there was a part of which a man was seen from the waist up, panting and sweating, blood streaming from a gouge in his shoulder. Although he'd aged and lost some hair, Nagao was unmistakably that man. Sadako had seen his face up close. Not only that, in her eyes, he was something wicked. With typical brashness, Ryuji pressured Nagao until he confessed everything. He told them all about the hot summer afternoon 25 years ago. Nagao had contracted smallpox from a patient while on a call to the sanatorium isolation ward in the mountains, and that afternoon, the early symptoms of the illness were starting to show. But in spite of his headache and fever, he didn't recognize at first that he had smallpox and went on treating tuberculosis patients as usual. He thought it was simply a cold. Then he met Sadako Yamamura in the country yard. She often came out to the sanatorium to visit her father. He was a patient there. Having just left the theater troupe, Sadako had nowhere else to go, and she was often up to see her father. One glance at Sadako, and Nagao was overwhelmed by her beauty. He approached her, and they began to talk. And then, as if guided by something beyond himself, not much, I'm sorry. Also, heads up to people who are here, it gets really fucked up after this piece. Yeah, it's my little reading corner that I started to do. Since I have a backlog of books and I get distracted easily, so I just decided to read them on stream. And currently I'm reading Spiral, which is a sequel to Ring, and it's the novel that inspired the horror movie series, The Ring. Ah, okay. Hold on. Hold on. Let me also pull up a translator too, brother. Hold on. 1 second. 1 second. 1 second. Okay. Okay, I'm so sorry if I mess up. I'm so sorry. I'm I haven't spoken Spanish in a hot minute, so I'm sorry. I'm so... I haven't spoken Spanish in a hot minute. I stopped speaking it because the person that I mainly did speak Spanish to, they're no longer here. So this isn't Google Translate. This is of another website, because I could lie, I don't really trust Google Translate, but you know what? It's been a hot minute. It's been a hot minute. Oh, you're fine. I mean, no, you're fine. You're fine. But yeah, I don't really speak much Spanish. I haven't really had much need to, so. No, but you're fine. You're fine. If you don't understand, that's perfectly fine. If you just want to sit, if you just want to be in chat, that's perfectly fine with me. Alrighty. So just FYI, this shit gets kind of they said it gets dark. It's gonna get really dark in this book in a few sentences. So brace yourselves. So one glance at Sadako, and Nagao was overwhelmed by her beauty. He approached her and they began to talk. And then, as if guided by something beyond himself, he took her to an abandoned house deep in the woods. There, in front of an old well, he raped her. It was then that Sadako, in her desperate attempt to resist, bit his shoulder. Between the bleeding and his feverish delirium, it took him some time to notice Sadako's uniqueness. She had testicular feminization syndrome, an extremely rare condition in which one had both male and female genitalia. A person with this syndrome usually had breasts and a vagina, but lacked a uterus and the fallopian tubes. Dressed, the person would appear quite female. But chromosomally would be XY, a male, and unable to bear children. Nagao strangled Sadako and threw her body in the well. He then threw rocks into the well after her. After hearing Nagao's confession, Asakawa showed him the plan of the resort and asked the doctor to show him on the map the location of the well. Nagao was able to indicate the general area, namely where Villa Lodge Cabin was located now. Asakawa and Ryuji immediately sped off to Pacific Land. Once there, they began a search for the well in the vicinity of the cabins. They found it beneath B4. Thank you, Jay. Hello to whoever is coming in. I am Villiana, your one and only villainess. And I am reading Spiral, which is the sequel to Ring. And if you Ring sounds familiar, it is because it is the novel that inspired the horror movie. So, spoilers. Once there, they began a search for the well in the vicinity of the cabins. They found it beneath cabin B4. The cabin stood on a gentle slope, and when they investigated the space beneath the porch, they saw the rim of an old well, covered with a concrete lid. If Sadako's hatred had radiated straight up out of the well, it would have run smack into the TV and VCR in the cabin above. The videotape was the perfect position to pick up her psychic projections. Asakawa and Ryuji broke a few boards, crawled under the cabin, pried the lid off the well, and set about the task to finding Sadako's remains. That's what both Asakawa and Ryuji now interpreted the missing charm to be. Sadako wanted whoever watched the videotape to release her from the cramped, dark space. The two men took turns descending into the well, scooping water out of the bottom of it with buckets. And when they finally, thankfully, fished from the mud a skull that they took to be Sadako's. It was already after 10 o'clock. Asakawa's deadline had come and gone, and he wasn't dead. They were satisfied that they'd figured out the secret of the videotape. After that, Asakawa took Sadako's remains back to Izu Oshima, while Ryuji returned to his apartment in Tokyo to work on an article. The case had been put to rest. The bones of Sadako Yamamura, possessor of fearsome psychic powers, had been rescued from the depths of the earth. She had been appeased. Neither Asakawa nor Ryuji had any doubt about that. Oh, how wrong they were. Oh my god. Totes to Miss Sadako, though. Having read that far, Ando now stood up, still holding the report, and opened the window. Imagining climbing down a rope into a well had given him the feeling that he was suffocating. It was like a doubly restricted space. Under the cabin, it would be dark even in the daytime. And then there was the well, not even a yard across. It gave him a flash of claustrophobia. He had to breathe outside for air. Directly beneath his window, he could see the dark woods of Meiji Shrine, swaying in the breeze. The pages in his hands fluttered too, started by the same current of air. The last page of the manuscript was in the printer now. One more page and Asakawa's account would be finished. Ando heard the sound of the printer finishing its task. He glanced back at the word processor only to find a mostly blank piece of paper staring back at him. He picked up the final page. It said, Sunday, October 21st. The nature of the virus is to reproduce itself. The charm? Make a copy of the video. And that was all. But it had to be the utmost importance. October 21st was the day of Asakawa's accident. The previous morning, Ando had dissected Ryuji's body and met Mai at the medical examiner's office. Although the manuscript ended abruptly, Ando could more or less film the rest himself. On October 19th, Sadako Yamamura's remains had been delivered into the custody of her relatives back home. That hadn't been the end of things, after all. Even Asakawa sat in a hotel on Oshima, composing his detailed report. Ryuji was dying in his apartment in East Nakano. Upon returning to Tokyo and learning of Ryuji's death, Asakawa had rushed to Ryuji's apartment. There he'd encountered Mai, Takano, and peppered her with what seemed to be strangely inappropriate questions. Ryuji really didn't tell you anything at the end? Nothing, say, about a videotape? It was easy to see why Asakawa had been in a panic. He had been convinced that he'd escaped death by figuring out the riddle of the videotape. Now he'd found out he was wrong. The curse still lived, and Asakawa was left without a clue. Why was Ryuji dead and Asakawa alive? Not only that, Asakawa's wife and child had a deadline of their own coming. At 11 the next morning. So Asakawa had to figure out the charm all over again, alone this time, and with only a few hours to do it. Logically, he realized that whatever it was the videotape had wanted him to do, he must have done it at some point in the past week without realizing it. Something that he could be sure Ryuji hadn't done. What could it be? Perhaps he spent the whole night wondering. And then finally, on the morning of the 21st, he had a spark of intuition. Maybe, and it hit upon what he was sure about the solution. He made a quick note of it in his word processor. Sunday, October 21st. The nature of the virus is to reproduce itself. The charm, make a copy of the video. What Asakawa meant here had to be none other than the smallpox virus. Just before her death, Sadako Yamamura had had physical relations with the last smallpox victim in Japan, Jotaro Nagao. It was natural to assume that the virus had invaded her body. Driven to the brink of extinction, the smallpox virus had borrowed Sadako's extraordinary power to accomplish the purpose of its existence, which was to reproduce itself. But once it took the form of a videotape, the virus couldn't reproduce on its own. It had to work through human beings, forcing them to make copies of it. If one were to fill in the missing part of that end of the tape, it would run like this. Those who have viewed these images are fated to die at this exact hour 1 week from now. If you do not wish to die, you must follow these instructions exactly. Make a copy of this videotape and show it to somebody else. In that light, things made sense. The day after he'd watched the videotape, Asakawa showed it to Ryuji, and he also made a copy for him. Without realizing it, he'd helped the virus propagate. But Ryuji never made a copy. Sure, he had the answer. Asakawa had loaded a VCR into the rented car and driven off somewhere. Undoubtedly, he'd planned to make 2 copies of the videotape and show them to 2 other people. One for his wife and one for his baby girl. The people he showed it to would then have to find new prey. Someone else to give a copy of the video to, but that wasn't the immediate problem. The important thing was to save the lives of his wife and child. But just at the height of his relief at having saved the lives of his loved ones, Asakawa had reached into the back seat and touched his wife and daughter and found them cold. He lost control of the car. Ando felt that he could understand Asakawa's catatonic state now. Not only was he devastated at the loss of his family, but he had no doubt also tormented by a question. What was the true nature of the charm? Every time he thought he had figured out, the answer slipped through his fingers, transforming itself, claiming another life. Rage and sorrow, and an endless repetition of the question. Why? Why was he still alive? Ando put the manuscript page in a pile on the table and then asked himself, Do you really believe this cock and bull story? He shook his head. I just don't know. He didn't know what else to say. He'd seen the unnatural sarcoma on Ryuji's coronary artery with his own eyes. 7 people were dead of the same cause. In their blood had been found a virus that closely resembled smallpox. And where had Mai disappeared to? What about that odd ambiance in her apartment, which she had seemingly vacated? That hair-raising imitation he'd had that something was there. The traces left on the videotape still on her VCR. Was the tape still propagating? Would it continue to claim new victims? The more he thought, the more questions Ando had. He turned off the word processor and reached for the whiskey on the sideboard. He knew he wouldn't be able to sleep tonight without the help of alcohol. Ando first dropped by the biochem lab and returned the word processor to Ueda, and then headed to the pathology department. Under his arm, he carried the report he printed out the night before. He intended to let Miyashita read it. Miyashita sat with his head down low on the table, scratching away with a ballpoint pen. Ando dropped the report on the tabletop next to him, and Miyashita looked up surprised. Listen, would you do me a favor and read this? Miyashita just stared back at Ando in amazement. What's going on? I want to know what you think of that. Miyashita picked up the document. It's pretty long. It is, but there are things in there that will interest you. It won't take long to read. You're not about to tell me you've been writing a novel in your spare time, are you? Kazuyuki Asakawa wrote a report about the deaths. You mean our Asakawa? Right. Miyashita looked interested now as he flipped through some of the pages. So there it is. Let me know what you think when you're done. Ando started to leave, but Miyashita called him back. Hold on a minute. What? Miyashita rested his cheek on his hand and tapped the table with the tip of his pen. You're pretty good at codes, aren't you? I wouldn't say I'm particularly good at them. In med school, some friends of mine played around with them, but that's about it. So Miyashita's still tapping on the table. Why? Miyashita took his elbow off the printout he'd been looking at and slid it over to Ando. This is why. He started tapping his pen on the center of the page. It was a printout he'd seen the day before. The results of the sequence the virus found on Ryuji's body. You showed me this yesterday. I know, but I just can't get over it. Ando picked up the piece of paper and held it up in front of his face. And to several points in an otherwise unordered sequence of bases, a string of bases in the same order had been inserted. It's like a whole fucking line of text. I'm not gonna read all that again. No question, it was strained for the same string of 42 bases to appear several times at appropriate intervals. And Ryuji's virus is the only one like this? Right. His is the only one with these extra 42 bases. Miyashita said, his gaze not wavering from Ando's. Doesn't that strike you as weird? Of course it does. The tap-tap of the ballpoint pen ceased. The thought crossed my mind that it might be some sort of code. Ando gulped. He couldn't remember having told Miyashita anything about what had happened after Ryuji's autopsy. Not about the corner of the newspaper, and certainly not about the fact that he'd come up with the word ring off of it. And yet now Miyashita was talking about codes. Assuming it was a code, who's sending it? Ryuji. Ando screwed his eyes shut. The idea was one he'd been desperately trying to avoid entertaining, and now Miyashita was shoving it in his face. Ryuji's dead. I performed the autopsy myself. Miyashita didn't seem fazed in the least. Well, whatever. Just see if you can decipher this, okay? Was it really possible that the sequence of bases could be somehow turned into a word? Just as the digits 178136 had quickly yielded ring, maybe these 42 letters could be made to form words. Maybe they did carry some important message. Had Ryuji himself, from beyond the grave, inscribed this over and over in his own remains? Ando's hand, clutching the printout, trembled as he felt himself being driven into the small blind alley as Asakawa. But there was no way he could refuse Miyashita's outright request. The idea that it might be a code had occurred to Ando, too, the first time he'd seen the sequence. But he'd buried the thought in the depths of his brain. He was afraid that if he didn't, the scientific framework on which he'd hung his life would be bent further out of shape. Things were threatening to go beyond his ability to absorb them. You could keep that. Take your time and see what you can do with it. Miyashita was supposed to be a scientist. Ando couldn't understand how he could bandy about these unscientific ideas so readily. I have faith in you. You'll figure it out, said Miyashita, giving Ando a pat on the butt. That was a whirlwind, as per usual. Oh, we're about halfway through the book now. Oh my gosh. Whew, man. That was a whirlwind of this series is wild. I'm glad I picked it up. I'm glad I've been wanting to read it for a while. I can't watch the movies, but I sure as hell can read the books. Oh my gosh. That was a wild ride, as per usual with the Ring books. Well, with Spiral. As I'm looking at it, I don't know what the hell it says. I'm looking right at the damn word. Okay. Oh, alrighty. Whew, man. Okay. So, tomorrow I am playing Stardew at 6. That's the plan? If stuff goes to plan. If stuff goes to plan, 6 p.m. If not, it's probably going to be pushed back maybe 2 hours. It really depends. I don't know, maybe come. Yeah, I'm probably gonna make an announcement. I'm probably gonna. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm doing something tomorrow, but I don't know about the time. Yeah, who knows? Anyways, yeah, I'm probably gonna like push it back like maybe like 2 hours, maybe, depending. All right. So yeah, things start due tomorrow. Alrighty. So, and with that, I will be taking my leave. So, good night, goodbye, or whenever you're watching this. Good night.